Hi, welcome to the next episode of the Cyber Insurance News podcast. My name is Martin Hinton, and joining me today is CEO of HYPR, Bojan Simic. I could tell you all about him. I've read a lot about him, but what we're going to do is jump right in and have Bojan tell us a little bit about himself, how he got to this phase in his career, and a little bit about HYPR. And then we're going to launch into today's conversation, which is all about, well, you know what? I'm going to let Bojan tell you. So, Bojan, first, thanks for having us. Tell us a little bit about what got you to this point in your career, and a little bit about HYPR.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm a co-founder of a cybersecurity startup, which means I'm a glutton for punishment. And for me, it's been an amazing 10-year or so journey now. Our company is based here in New York City. I got here by actually working in the cybersecurity space, but originally working as a software engineer. And in the early stages of my career path, I actually ended up writing a piece of software for a large client. And a few months after the software was rolled out, it was successful by everybody's measure. It ended up getting hacked, and I really learned what cybersecurity was at that point, kind of trial by fire, and trying to remediate that. And that got me down a path of jumping into cybersecurity. Working in that industry for several years for many of the large financials here in the city. And for me, I got down the path of co-founding this company and starting down the identity security journey in particular, because working as a security professional, you very quickly realize that 9 out of the 10 things that you deal with on a day-to-day basis are identity related, specifically password related, more often than not. So I figured, there's got to be a better way to do this stuff. And here we are today. HYPR is 10 years old. We're based in New York City, and we've got a bunch of really great folks building technology for some of the largest companies on the planet.
That's really interesting. The personal motivation to dive into cybersecurity, I hadn't known that, but thanks for sharing. So, passwords. We've all been using them for a long time, and there's a sort of twofold thing occurring here. You need them for so many platforms. They're the way you get in there. You're key to things, and there's a lot of places that require them. So, password problems, the traditional methods we have. For people who aren't cybersecurity experts, explain to us some of the problems that exist with passwords today, and why they can put individuals and organizations and companies at risk.
Yeah, it's interesting. When the password was first created in computing, it was created with the intent that it wouldn't be used in a networked environment. So back when computers were first created and passwords were first created to access them, in order to get to the computer where you type in the password, you typically had to go through multiple doors and locks to get into a computer lab at a university or a government facility or something similar to then enter that password. And with the advent of the internet, we suddenly took all the software that we had built and were building, and we put it on the internet where anybody from anywhere in the world could try to knock on that door with a password. And so the original intent was really, misutilized or circumvented by the internet. And as a result, we as an industry have really tried to compensate for this by adding layers on top of passwords. We put users in positions where they have to choose longer ones or more complicated ones. We may require users to get codes sent to their mobile phones or respond to push notifications now, all adding layers on top of a foundation that is fundamentally insecure, which is the password. And our philosophy is, as long as there is a credential like a password or anything else that a person can be tricked into providing, that they can type in, that they can be convinced to provide to someone else or share with somebody, either accidentally or on purpose, that's not the way forward. And that's why much of the work that we've done over the last decade or so has been to eliminate the password in as many areas as possible.
That's really interesting. One of my backgrounds is in history, and the why thing, the reason things are often the way they are is because that's how we did them yesterday. The whole notion that the original passwords were only utilized after going through, I guess, physical doors that might require some access, like a key or a security guard to let you pass. And we just morphed that into the online space where those sorts of additional barriers don't exist. I don't know if I've ever heard that before. Is that sort of a classic thing where, you just sort of, this is working fine, we got to do something else that's more important until the big problem comes along? That's amazing to me.
Yeah, I think if you ask the average person in the early 80s, like, hey, are you going to be doing all your banking on the internet or on your computer? The average person would say no. And so I think people never really thought that we would be doing everything on the internet. So it was a very gradual thing, kind of like the frog in the water that's starting to slowly boil, doesn't really know what's happening. And I think that's the same exact thing that happened with passwords and us on the internet.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So in the case of passwords, right? So if we think about a password, the words get us in. What's the solution then? I mean, I know that we've read in one of your reports about passkeys and the nature of that sort of thing. So what solution does Hyper have for this situation?
Yeah, so this isn't a so passkeys is the way forward. That's the short answer. Passkeys are actually a result of open standards that have been created by 250 plus companies in the industry to try, where we all came together and said we got to get rid of passwords. Let's create a standards based way to do that everybody can align on. So companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, all the big banks are part of this consortium called the FIDO Alliance, and we came together and created what's known now as Passkeys. And I'm on the board of that alliance, have been for several years, and it's basically a operating model for companies to start implementing technology to get rid of passwords, and that technology is called Passkeys. Now, Passkeys are essentially a key that is allocated to a specific device that you own, such as your phone or a piece of hardware that you plug into your computer. And it's basically, it has a key on it. It has a credential. That key is not something that is shareable. So you can't write it down on a piece of paper and give it to somebody else. You can't tell it to somebody over the phone. And you basically use that key on your phone, for example, in conjunction with your Face ID or your Touch ID to access services downstream. And so what this does is it basically puts users into a position where they have a way to access their banking or any other application on their device that supports passkeys, but they actually don't have a way to share that credential with somebody malicious, even if they wanted to. And that is what enables the consumer protection and enterprise protection that is sorely needed today. Because even in the modern age of AI tools and things like that, we've been trained for decades to look for uh, phishing emails and things like that, and hackers trying to scam us. By implementing a technology like a passkey, which is essentially a non-shareable credential, that's what enables companies to have a lot more comfort in the security posture of their organizations and their products, because typically humans are the weakest link in these environments, and being able to eliminate the possibility of them sharing a credential is critical.
So you're telling me that you can't put your passkey under the underside of your keyboard and on a post-it note? Is that the situation?
Unfortunately, not. Yeah, you can't write it down. You can't share it with somebody else. But it has massive convenience benefits for end users, and it has significant upside for organizations in terms of eliminating fraud and keeping out the bad
So
guys.
let me see if I understand this. On every device I might use to interact with my company. So let's keep it simple. I've got a laptop and I've got a mobile phone, a smartphone. We're we're no brand pitching just yet. The idea is that phone and that laptop have two separate identical pieces of information that's called a passkey. And when seen by, say, your bank or your company network for whatever reason, it recognizes that passkey as authentic, and that's what grants you access over the internet. Is that a simpler way to put it? I don't know if it's simpler, but just one.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, and the passkeys are supported by all the major operating systems right now. Android, iOS on Apple supports it. Uh, Windows with Microsoft supports it. So all these organizations, all these tech companies have come together and said we need to support passkeys. Let's make it so that our phones and our computers support this technology so that the end users can utilize it.
And another layer of this is that there's actually, in this context, less for the individual user to remember or do, right? They just need to have made sure that their phone was set up properly, and I suppose the app was installed and downloaded properly initially. And then, as you mentioned earlier, Face ID triggers the passcodes. I don't know, is transmission or being, turned on to so that whatever network you're trying to get into can see it. I mean, this is simpler, not more complicated, right?
That's right. And major brand names have recently launched passkeys. For example, CVS.com here in the United States, I think 85% of the US population lives within 10 miles of a CVS. They provide this capability for accessing your account if you want to refill prescriptions. It's especially useful in situations where people aren't logging in multiple times a day every day, right? If you log in once a month to refill your prescription, you might not remember your password, which is where passkeys really come in handy. The other area where passkeys really come in handy is uh, what passkeys are copied across your iCloud or your Google account across your devices. So that means automatically. So that means if you get a new phone and you trade in your old one, when you access your account on your new phone, you essentially get your passkeys on that new device. So that means that you know when you get new devices, you don't have to think about what are all the passwords for all the apps that you've been using for the last year.
Yeah, well, I mean that idea of having to, have a physical backup, a notebook with things written in them once upon a time, not to date myself, but that reality, and then having to re-enter them all when you got a new device or you were, using a new computer, it was, again, it creates exposure, right? That means that the password or information to get you into somewhere is now in a separate place that is less secure, whether it's a notebook or the famous post-it note under your keyboard. You touched on that's really interesting, and I think that I think there's a human condition, right? We add things to solve problems. We don't take things away, and the big headline for me here is that passkeys are a simplified version of getting access to all these things that you would have and do need access to. Not There's not a new layer added to it, which is, again, to your point earlier on, a huge issue with the way we sort of sought to improve passwords to date. Um, so I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's always much, much easier to add to technology than it is to remove from technology. And this is one of those examples where the problem finally got bad enough to the point where we all had to come together and say, we got to get rid of this thing. Let's create something
Yeah.
better.
Well, good. So you touched on this just a moment ago, but one of the things that was in the new report you have on this subject is phishing-resistant authentication. And I wonder if you could explain what that means in plain English. I think a lot of people know what phishing is, and I think that they get the idea that, particularly nowadays with the apparently my Easy Pass balance is in need of being addressed. There's an abundance of, I think, understanding about how, particularly in the AI environment where you can be bombarded over text or whatever it might be. I wonder if you could explain what that phishing resistant authentication is, and the word I have in front of me is, it's a bit of a breakthrough. So if you could take me through that.
Yeah. So, you mentioned most people know what phishing is. It's basically you get a link in a text message or an email that says, click this for some amazing thing. You click it and it asks you for your username and password and some other information. And that is most likely a malicious site that is used to harvest people's credentials. And so what passkeys do is passkeys are tied to a specific trusted website. So when you register a passkey with, let's say, your bank, and your bank is bank.com, that passkey only works with bank.com. So that means that passkey cannot be utilized before any other website. And what most of these phishing sites do is they try to mimic um, uh, legitimate websites, right? So bank.com might be BAAMK.com or something. or bank.io, where the average person might fall for it or think it's legitimate because it looks like the real thing, but it's not. Passkeys were designed from the ground up to be phishing resistant. And what that really means is that credential is not usable by anybody but the website that it was intended for. And we mentioned earlier that credential cannot be shared by the end user either intentionally or unintentionally.
That's really interesting. I mean, so basically, again, to put it in terms that my little brain can understand, the passkey in your description is a unique key. You can't lend that key to anyone else, and that key only opens the right door. And if you try to use it in another door, it won't work.
That's
Example,
right.
if I were to try and enter my password on, and I mean, I think that the audience might know this, but the sophistication around the mimicking of some of these legitimate websites is extraordinary. Changing a single character's font to make it look different or whatever it might be. The 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 organized element of cybercrime is significant, right? It's not, as someone I recently had on said, the ChatGPT kid in a black hoodie is not an accurate depiction of the modern day cyber criminal. This is where it's very important that the sophistication and the sort of intelligence behind the security solutions in this case matter. So what I'm hearing you say is that if I get one of these texts about my bank account or my credit card or my Easy Pass, and I try to use the app that is legitimately associated with that, or the website that's legitimate, or I click that link, my phone will not permit me into that space, and therefore you can't become a victim of this phishing, or at least it's more resilient to this. Is that a fair way to sort of summarize it?
That's exactly right. So if you get a text message and you click a link in that text message, it takes you to a spoof website. Your phone will see that there is no passkey for that spoof website, and it just won't respond. And so since you don't have a password for that account anymore, there's no credential to type in or provide that can be intercepted.
So as a human being with my senses, I might see the Aetna website and think this looks exactly like the Aetna website I go to all the time, and the passkey on my phone's like, no, you're not seeing what I'm seeing. Trust me, we're not going in here. It ain't safe. That's what's happening.
That's right. Yeah.
So it again, I mean, I know I've touched on this, but the idea that it removes effort and energy from you, and again, this is the promise of technology, right? It makes complicated things a little bit simpler or a little more efficient. It does seem again like this is a no-brainer path. And to your point earlier, some of the clients you have, the amount of money they lose to these sorts of crimes, whether it's fraud or data theft or ransomware, is significant. So they're obviously seeing the need to dial up their own cybersecurity. And again, the fact that they're organizing to do it is again probably something people should take away as an indication that the big boys and girls who run these companies are seeing the problem and they're taking it seriously. And again, on an individual level, it's something to think about as well, that you maybe don't use the same password across 10 websites or whatever it might be. Again, I just throw that advice in there because it's one of the things I keep hearing, and it's something so many people do because they're so hard to remember, which again, this passkey takes away.
That's right. And what's happening in many companies who have made passkeys available to their customers now, they'll do this thing where when you register a passkey with that application or that website, it will ask you, would you like to turn off your password so that you can't use it moving forward, which means that you can't share with somebody intentionally or unintentionally. And that's a really great thing to have. And this is starting to become a trend first now in financial services industry in particular. The crypto industry is a big fan of this because with crypto transactions, they're not really reversible. So they try to put a lot more consumer protection with passkeys and other modern authentication technologies for their customers as a result.
The most basic thing about this, before we move on, the passkey is it's like walking into your once upon a time local mom and pop pharmacy and knowing the people there and recognizing them, and they recognize you. So it's Martin. He's here for his whatever. This is that put onto an exponential scale for the size of the global population, the number of people we deal with. It is, in some respects, sort of a stepping back into a place where there is a real familiarity. It's just in digital sense. Is that, again? I hate to oversimplify things, but
That's it, and it's cryptographically proven, right? So that's from a security perspective, it's like that analogy, but 100% certain every time. You know, 'cause somebody can't just walk in and say, you know, "Hey, I'm Joe's nephew. I'm here to pick up his prescription." You know, that wouldn't work.
so I touched on that because the next topic I wanted to bring up was deep fakes. And the big one you hear about that I did go down the rabbit hole of verifying is the one involving a CFO being deep faked in a video call and other things that resulted in a multi-million dollar, tens of millions of dollars fraudulent wire transfer out of Hong Kong. And I think it was actually a UK based company that was involved. Um, Family passwords, people, Dad, I've been arrested. You need to Venmo this guy $1,000. These sorts of things are happening. The voice, particularly deepfake, is a big one because we're so reliant on our phones. It's a way into our reality. Someone's calling and it sounds like a distressed loved one. Talk to me about the deepfake kind of attacks that are existing, what you're seeing, and yeah, dive into that for me.
Yeah, you know, with deepfakes, it's a really fascinating set of subjects because um, a lot of the things that we thought that we could trust on the internet are just evaporating very, very quickly. And it's happening faster than people ever had imagined with the ability to create near perfect voice and video clones nowadays. And so we're seeing this be a major attack vector for organizations recently. One popular attack vector on the enterprise side for employees is um, hackers will, not even hackers necessarily, but impersonators will use deepfakes to impersonate a human being and then get a job at a US based company, but they're really somewhere in Vietnam or North Korea or Latin America. And so they'll collect a US salary, but um, they'll be in a country where economies of scale are very, very different. And deepfakes are also very prevalent in the scamming type of scenarios that you mentioned around voice and so on and so forth. So I think what's going to have to happen sooner than later is uh, you can think about it. You can think about passkeys potentially being implemented in not just applications where I'm accessing my bank account, but also applications where I'm calling you and we're having a conversation. And I need to know that the passkey that was issued to me is the person that you're actually interacting with by me making sure that I can present that passkey whenever we talk. This will be a incremental change, I think, and I think one of the things that we'll have to also change is the channels by which we communicate. It's interesting. I was talking to some folks lately, and I asked them, like, how often do you just pick up a random phone call that you get? And nobody does these days anymore, really. But you're far more likely to pick up a phone call that you get through WhatsApp or through one of these other channels that you typically communicate with friends with, because in some ways they're more trusted than the typical phone call. And so I think the methods by which we authenticate each other and the methods by which we communicate will have to align with the new reality of the fact that the voice on the other line or the video on the other end of the line might not be the person that I think I'm talking to.
It's it sounds a little doomsday-ish, but there is a reality to the fact that you really can't trust anything you see online anymore. Is that too hyperbolic? That you need to trust but verify needs to be sort of put on steroids?
I think it's going to have to, because these bots and agents can replicate infinitely, right? And the only thing that's really holding them back a little bit right now is the fact that generating these things is a bit cost prohibitive, right? So we mostly see this being used right now in high value transactions like the one you mentioned that was $25 million, or nation state situations where governments are targeting each other or citizens of their enemies. But in 10 years, those economic prohibitors are not going to exist because these things are going to be cheap enough And at that time, I think we're definitely going to have to adjust.
You touch on something that we all love the new thing, and the new thing is AI. And someone I spoke to recently reminded me or cautioned me to remember that AI is amazing. It's going to be used for good and bad, but cyber criminals have been doing just fine without AI, so they're not in a huge rush to reinvent the wheel when they don't need to. To your point about the deepfake thing, obviously that's the glaring headline. It's the it's the dramatic photograph. It's the bleeds, it's leads sort of element of all this, but the idea that we're not even quite there with regard to the scale, at least, is something that is probably useful to remind people. You touched on the idea that when you call someone, I wonder if you could just break down a little bit how that might work from a technical point of view. Would the passkey be something that is necessary for me to get into? I mean, you mentioned WhatsApp. How would that actually play out? I mean, if I were to call you and discuss something, how would you verify that I'm who I say I am? How would that work?
Yeah. So for us, the approach that we implement is something that we call multi-factor verification, which is different from multi-factor authentication. So, and anytime we do anything of consequence digitally, in this case, it's moving money or making changes to an account. In order to securely bootstrap or allocate a passkey to someone, which we know now is phishing resistant and non shareable and all those things, we need to make sure that the person is who they say they are. And we do this by taking a multi factor approach. And so for us, what we do is we'll verify that the person is coming from a device that we have seen them come from before. We verify that they are in a location that they should be at. And we can also verify their government issued document that they may need to scan or tap to their mobile device in order to be verified. And then once we have significant confidence that the person is who they say they are, we can drop a passkey onto their phone and then use that passkey to verify them moving forward. So, what this would really mean is if you're using WhatsApp, you would be verified by such a process. You would be then issued a passkey, which actually Facebook now supports passkeys, which is great. And what then if you're calling me, I may request that you present that passkey before I accept your call. So you present that passkey, and I see, oh, it's Martin. It's coming. He was able to provide the right passkey, and then we can have a conversation. Now, to you as a user, this would just be like, oh, do your Face ID on your phone before you call Boyan. But all behind the scenes, all this stuff is happening.
So we're a long way from mother's maiden name and a street you might have lived on, or a pet's name, huh?
Yeah, like I mean, it's one of the things that I've seen recently is where generative AI is excellent at guessing people's passwords. So I'm sure everybody has gotten multiple emails that said, "Hey, your password was stolen in this breach from this company this at this time." And so what AI is really good at is looking up people's previously stolen passwords and then creating the next 20 iterations of that password that they're most likely to create based on some contextual data about them. And so, if your kid's name is Emily and she was born in 1993 and your password is Emily 1993, AI will look you up on the internet, see your other kids' names in the year they were born potentially, and try those combinations.
You see, this is one of the things where people often ask me, like, why does anyone want my data? Well, it's not you, it's not your data, it's the volume of information and the way, to your point, AI can take it and combine it in all sorts of ways that could be useful and profitable for these cyber criminals. Is again something I think, at least, I mean, I'm certainly in this category. Like the scale of it, you touched on the deep fake element of people working in foreign countries, creating an entire persona, getting a remote job. And I mean, did you have the Lego set with the fake North Korean worker? Was that
That's right. Yeah.
like, this is actually happening? And I think some people don't quite comprehend that it's even possible, never mind actually happening. You've touched on a lot now that sort of brings us to one of the things that I have a kind of mixed feeling about. the vast majority, and this is in your report, of cybersecurity events and incidents are a function of human error. And I always feel like that's a bit harsh. And I think even in the cybersecurity space, when you look at the psychological damage in a company, if someone's responsible for a breach, the way it affects their morale and their mood, to put it in layman's terms, it's a bit harsh, right? Because these are very sophisticated, organized criminals that are using, the highest levels of, human engineering and psychological sort of trickery to get you to click on this or, share something with someone. But your report shows that human error is the leading cause, and moving away from the element that's human, Emily 123, your kid's name and their birthday. Is this something that is, going to make the innocent mistakes that are hugely costly far less likely?
I certainly think so. And that was our intent from the beginning, right? Is put people in a position where their day to day is easier because they don't have to worry about typing in and remembering credentials. And at the same time, make it much, much harder for the hackers to get access into accounts to begin with because they can't trick somebody into providing it. And so for us, it's really easy to blame people, but really it's on us who build the technology to make it secure from the ground up. And so they're just using the technology that the way that was provided, right? They may not be using it the way it was intended, but they're using it the way it was provided. And so I think if we can eliminate those vectors of attack that are right now are just very low hanging fruit for the bad guys, we'll be in a much better place. There was a large casino chain, I believe, last year that was breached using a social engineering attack. And it was nothing sophisticated. It was the person just called up the IT help desk and said, "Hey, this is Bill. I can't log into my account. Help me out here." And the help desk has the word help in it. They're there to help you go about your day and be successful in your job. And so, they didn't know that the person on the other end of the line was a hacker, and they gave them access to the corporate credentials. And so, um, eliminating those possibilities, eliminating those really simple attack vectors that are right now getting a lot of success is step number one.
You touch on something now, because that's a common vector for these attacks. I think that was the case in the Marks and Spencer hack as well. It was someone calling up a help desk. You also touch on the idea that the etymology, or excuse me, the words matter. Help desk, we're here to help. The other thing that I've read recently, and a few people have said to me recently, is that we need to move ourselves away from the idea that the IT people, the help desk people, and the cybersecurity people are the same people. And that doesn't mean there can't be responsibilities like any employee might have for using the right techniques and protocols when they're dialing in, if you will. But that idea that there needs to be a separate way of thinking about the cybersecurity part of this. And the analogy I've used is that, if you have a warehouse and the fence around your warehouse and the doors have locks and, security glass, if you have someone come by to fix the fence or repair a lock or replace a broken pane of glass, that's not a security job. That's a maintenance job. The security job is the person monitoring cameras you might have, or your alarm company, or the guard you have sitting at the front gate. That's security. And I wonder whether or not you have any thoughts about that sort of, mindset approach as you're in a situation where you're trying to move people away from the password mindset into this, password free future.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between you picking up the phone and calling somebody to ask you to get help with how to open up a Word document because it's not working, versus calling up the help desk to get help for getting access to corporate systems. Right? There's a difference between those functions, right? And so the security team should be the ones handling the credentialing aspect of it, and then there's a help desk team for the day to day stuff that also goes wrong. And I think that distinction needs to be made, and as long as people think that they are responsible for something, they're going to make it as easier as possible for people to get that if help is in their name. I don't know if you've seen this. I think it's an Instagram channel or something where this guy, he just carries a ladder around and he tries to get access to buildings just by walking in with a ladder. Right. And And the amount of buildings that he gets access to is unbelievable because people just think he's there to fix something because he's walking in with a ladder. So they're holding the door open for him, like, yeah, come on in, type of thing. Whereas he has no business being there. And it's one of those things where a lot of times people being helpful actually backfires, and there needs to be a separation of duties with regards to who's there to actually help people with their day to day versus who's there to provide the security for the company.
It's a bit off topic, but the human psychology part of this sort of thing is fascinating to me. And what you're describing just then is, cover for action, cover for status, which are two hallmarks of, if you will, in the field espionage and spycraft and that sort of thing. And it is amazing how, the human beings are complicated, but we've also been around a long time. So there's a lot of data to establish the risks we can create, and the level of manipulation that can be used in that space is, everything from, I guess, the high end corporate advertising and marketing of products down to a guy with a ladder. I have not seen that. Well, I promise. Well, I'll find that handle on Instagram, and when we post this, there'll be a link in the show notes because it is. It's a good reminder. It's a simple reminder about how doobies were. I mean, I've been once at the age of 21, I was conned on the street by a classic sort of street level con. And looking back, I can't comprehend how stupid I was. But there I was losing $100, and these were 1992 dollars. It was no
$1 million.
So I don't have anything more. And as I promised you before we started recording, is there anything you wanted to discuss about HYPR and what you guys are up to, or anything that we've touched on you might want to elaborate on? But here's your chance to give us the lottery number picks, whatever it is you have on your mind.
No, thank you for the opportunity. And look, I think we live in an extremely dynamic and exciting time with lots of new technologies being kind of really rethought from ground zero. Just with the advent of some of the generative AI and LLM tools. I think one of the things that everybody should be mindful of is these things will provide us with efficiencies that we can't even think of yet. But at the same time, we will have to think about how the security controls operate at the same time. And one of the things that we're seeing, at least in the enterprise space around AI in particular, is everybody's doing a lot of experimenting and tinkering, but nobody's really taking a big leap to use it in a production context because there's no security team out there that feels fully comfortable right now leveraging these technologies in use cases and scenarios that truly matter, that could be life or death. And so I think for us on the technology side, we really have to think about how does identity and security fit into this puzzle, and how are we going to address that over the next 5 to 10 years. So that's what we're thinking about here at HYPR. We're thinking about how does identity apply and its security apply, not just to the everyday consumer out there right now using their Aetna app, but also 5 years from now when you have a personal AI agent, how are they accessing that information on your behalf, and who's responsible ultimately for the liability and security aspects of that new reality. So I would just encourage everybody to think about that. Obviously, check out HYPR. If you have any questions or thoughts, I would love to hear from you.
You make a great point, because at the end of the day, all of this is about people, right? And if people aren't who they say they are, or you can't trust them to be who they say they are, it starts to not work as well as it should, and people don't have the confidence in it to lean into some of the bigger ideas that need to be worked at. Because I think like you, we are at the Model T Ford phase of the moment in technological advancement. Just like 100 years ago or 110 years ago, if I told people that, by the hundreds, they'd pile into an aluminum tube and cross the Atlantic in 5 hours, they would have looked at you like you were crazy. I think that 50 years from now, we're going to be able to look back at this moment and be in awe. So thank you for that sort of high-minded thought. So first of all, Bojan Simic, CEO of HYPR, based in New York City. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you breaking down some of this complicated stuff and hearing out some of my simplified takes. I'm really, really grateful for your time and joining us today. I'm Martin Hinton. This is the Cyber Insurance News and Information Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. and enjoy the rest of your day.